That is insane I heard this.
So wait a minute. Okay. Let me just see if I understand this. One of the things that the judges are supposed to do when deciding on bail for these people is whether there's going to be a risk to the community. So in this decision, they say, well, this person's probably going to breach the conditions that I put out there. So rather than say, maybe I shouldn't be granting bail, it's, maybe I won't impose any conditions whatsoever. That, what?
Yeah, what?
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Northern Perspective. We have one of our favorite MPs back on the show to talk about an issue that unfortunately is affecting so many Canadians far too often, and that has to do with crime, violent crime, and in one particular instance, youth crime. So joining us to talk about how this is affecting Canadians, what could be done about it. Mr. Larry Brock, welcome back to Northern Perspective.
Thank you, Ryan, Tanya. I love being back on your show.
So, a lot of Canadians may have enjoyed the summer, but there are too many Canadians that just face tragedy this summer. And unfortunately, based on the numbers and the way we see the trends going, we don't see that stopping with this violent crime wave that seems to be running across Canada. Home invasions seem to be something of the norm now. I was remarking to somebody before that I remember a period in Canada where if there was a violent crime, if there was a murder, that used to be national news because they were so rare. And now it almost feels like we're watching American TV. So what are you seeing as it relates to this epidemic that is moving across Canada?
Well, you've hit the nail on the head. The explosion of violent crime is something that this country hasn't seen, period. StatsCan released its numbers for 2024 a couple of weeks ago. We've seen increasing numbers across all the major serious offenses: homicide, gun offenses, intimate partner violence, sex assaults, through the roof. And I'm feeling it in my own community. I know you're feeling it in your community here in southwestern Ontario. I've taken the liberty of traveling this country this past summer, talking to community groups, talking to stakeholders, talking to police chiefs and associations and the like. Everywhere in this country, there is a prevailing sense of fear and mistrust and a demand for normalcy, however that looks. Normalcy for me, the way that I take a look at recent events, is going to bed at night in your own castle, your own home, knowing full well that you've locked the doors, the windows are locked, that you can sleep peacefully at night, knowing that you and your loved ones are going to wake up the next morning without any fear of any disturbance, without any intrusion. I want people to go to bed at night knowing that their dream vehicle that they've worked hard to purchase is still going to be in their driveway when they wake up. I want people who feel the need, whatever that need may be, to walk their neighborhood. If that neighborhood is in a suburb, if that neighborhood is in a downtown core, I want these individuals to feel freedom, to feel a sense of confidence, knowing that there is law and order within their communities. Sadly, no one in this country, I would dare say, has that feeling right now. And that is a sad indictment on this country, a proud member of our G7 group, that we have this prevailing sense of fear. So we've talked about in other podcasts, we've talked about the root causes, we've talked about the problems, we've talked about our broken bail system. You know, we're hearing from Mark Carney as recently as last week, again, There's going to be some type of crime bill being introduced in the fall. How it's going to look, how it's going to deal with bail, the timing of it, no one knows for sure. All I know is they've had 5 months, literally 5 months, since he was elected as a leader, and then the election and he becoming Canada's next prime minister, to introduce legislation, to telegraph with some conclusion as to how this is going to improve our current justice system, how this is going to help alleviate that sense of fear that Canadians are facing. So I'm optimistic that something is going to happen by this government, but I'm also very cautious that I've heard this before, and I've heard this literally for the last almost 4 years since I won my first election in September 2021. They all talk a good game. And I'm talking the government, then under Justin Trudeau, now under Mark Carney and all of his ministers, that we take community safety very seriously, that we're listening to the stakeholders, that we are delivering relief for Canadians. We want to keep them safe, but the proof is in the pudding. You know, to your point, you can't wake up without reading, hearing, or seeing some violent act being perpetrated somewhere in this country. It is happening at an alarming rate. So I would love to share with you what I'm seeing and what I believe to be the right solution, the only solution that is going to address this once and for all.
You know, you mentioned your cross-country tour, and the last time you were on, that was right before you were embarking on that. You mentioned you're hearing a lot of the same things across the country. Did anything surprise you in a good or negative way as your tour progressed? Well,
particularly out west, I'm going to center out British Columbia, particularly Vancouver and Surrey. I had read about the rising rate of extortion. And, you know, again, stats can confirm this. There are some provinces and some cities that have seen almost 1,000% increase in the extortion cases in those communities. Those are extremely disturbing, alarming rates. So I had the opportunity of speaking with the Surrey police chief as well as the Surrey mayor, and she has described a complete sense of lawlessness in that community, as well as the police chief. The degree by which extortion and the fear and the uncertainty that these accused parties who engage in extortionist activities is just creating a sense of hopelessness, that people are saying, you know, if I have a business, I can't maintain my business because of the threats and the extortion demands that are being made on me. And if I don't comply, I may wake up and drive to my business the next day and see it completely burnt down. Or I may see my windows shot out. Or I may see armed thugs waiting for my arrival, demanding money. And it's not the typical, and I asked her, is it the typical extortion case that I'm familiar with? You pay me X amount of dollars, I'll provide you protection for this business. And she says, oh no, this is an ongoing demand to receive actually nothing in return, other than you don't give me money, you may not have a business.
Because we know the prevalence of the Chinese triads infiltrating in British Columbia and Vancouver. Is that a lot of the genesis of where this is coming from, or are they unsure about that yet?
You know, it comes from pretty much every demographic that's out there. They can't identify one more than the other. It is becoming so easy, and the prevailing attitude is out there that this is a get-rich-quick scheme, that you demand money and by force, if necessary, and brandish a knife or brandish a weapon, you're likely going to get some type of compensation for that. So it's getting to the point where people are fleeing en masse these communities because they can't live like this. They can't continue their business under this threat environment. The police are doing their best. The Crown attorneys in that community are doing their best. But we really need to, excuse me, I'm about to sneeze. We really need to do an overhaul, in my view, in the criminal justice system to increase the penalties related to extortion. It hasn't been touched in decades. We need to make mandatory minimum sentences for these extortionists, because one of the prevailing themes I want to talk about today and perhaps other future podcasts is there has to be a sense of deterrence. And deterrence is one of the sentencing factors that are currently in the criminal code, but it's been so watered down by this liberal government in terms of how they coddle and support and promote and make it easier for criminals to get through the system, that they've watered down the impact that deterrence is supposed to have. Deterrence is twofold: specific deterrence to the offender and general deterrence to the community, so that the sentence should reflect a significant reminder to the offender, these were the consequences. You committed this crime, you were convicted for this crime, these are now your consequences. You should learn from these consequences not to commit that act again. That's specific deterrence. That's not working anymore under this liberal government since 2015. General deterrence is even more watered down because there was a point in time, you're close to my age demographic, Ryan, there was a point in time where newspaper reporters would constantly report on criminal activities in our courtrooms. And while we're getting a little bit of that now, we are only getting what I consider to be a very small percentage of the most serious cases that are going through the courts. But I remember a time when I was a young defense lawyer and a young Crown attorney that I would see my local reporters spending the entire day, either in bail court or trial court or guilty plea court, reporting, showing the name, identifying the crime, identifying the sentence, providing a little narrative of what they did, and would then broadcast that or publish that in the paper the very next day. That was general deterrence because the community was then allowed to read what's been happening in our communities. So I know what happened with the Spectator here in Hamilton. I know what happened with the Toronto Sun and the Toronto Star. But again, because newspapers have changed substantially, their staff has been reduced. My local paper, the Brantford Expositor, only publishes twice a week. I know that the reporters are not there every day in court. They do their best to capture the most serious stuff. But the ability for the public to read the paper or read it online and say, okay, yes, there are consequences for committing this particular act. Maybe I should not think about doing that particular act because I don't want to find myself in similar circumstances. That's general deterrence. It has been weakened because of the technology that we have right now and the lack of resources that newspapers generally have. But not to say that it can't be affected in other ways, and it can be and it should be. So I wanted to highlight that because I think that is a prevailing issue that we need to adjust at the federal level. We need to have meaningful, significant sentences. So I heard about that, extortion issues in BC. I then found out a disturbing trend, which I hope was a one-off, and I haven't been able to follow up on this yet. But while I was touring Edmonton, I spoke to the president of the Edmonton Police Service, and he brought to my attention that a few weeks prior to my visit, he was seeing a trend of the local judges and the JPs in that jurisdiction releasing individuals, repeat violent individuals, from their bail court with only one term. And that term was to attend court at a later date. And I said, and no other conditions to protect the public or protect the victim? No. And I said, why? And he smiled and he said, well, the rationale was those judges, those JPs, felt that it would be an invitation to breach if they added more conditions to a repeat offender. So again, the hell with the community. Who cares about community safety? Who cares about victim safety? Let's make it easier for the accused. We don't want the accused to amass further breach charges because they got a pattern of breaching bail or probation orders. That is insane that I heard this.
So wait a minute. Okay. Let me just see if I understand this. One of the things that the judges are supposed to do when deciding on bail for these people is whether there's going to be a risk to the community. So in this decision, they say, well, this person's probably going to breach the conditions that I put out there. So rather than say, maybe I shouldn't be granting bail, it's, maybe I won't impose any conditions whatsoever. What?
Yeah. What? What is happening in Edmonton? That's, in my view, that's an isolated case. I need to examine it further. I hope it is not a pattern that is being repeated in other provinces in this country, but I'm going to look into that. I have heard judges trying to be creative with probation orders to make sure that it's going to assist rather than punish. And sometimes, and I've had personal cases where I can reflect upon this, where they said, yeah, Mr. Brock, that does make sense that your request for this particular condition in a probation order, but, you know, there may be, there may be a suggestion that this could weaken their ability to rehabilitate themselves and it may open themselves up to a potential breach. We're not going to include it. I have seen personally that, never in the bail context. Because let's face it, the number one aspect of a bail application is an assessment of risk. And can the risk be overcome with a plan for release that includes supervision and conditions to not communicate, to not attend, that type of thing, while at the same time protecting the victim or the community? That's how it's supposed to work. It's not supposed to be completely one-sided and currying favor with the accused.
Okay.
I was shocked and confused as you are, Ryan.
So why do perpetrators have more rights than victims in this country?
Well, that goes to the whole philosophy, in my view, Tanya, of this Liberal government. They have favored the accused literally since 2015, and even previous Liberal governments have favored the accused,
and we see that in the stats.
And we saw that in the stats, and you released a graphic not too long ago that clearly showed how crime was reduced under Stephen Harper. It increased prior to Stephen Harper and increased after Stephen Harper. Proof is in the pudding. The Liberal government has never used the mandate of law and order. That's never been part of their vocabulary. And, you know, the origin of this, someone was asking me, where did this come from? Where did this philosophy come from? Because I've often said to you and to others, community safety is not partisan. I think regardless of your political ideology, everyone wants to live in a safe community. That's just common sense.
Absolutely.
Well, and there's this case, I can't remember how many years ago it was. in another country, they decided they wanted to be very progressive, and they built a penitentiary, but it was supposed to be cutting edge, and they decided that they were going to do the opposite of a normal penitentiary and grant freedom, basically. So they had this section of land, and they built all these quote-unquote cottages, and they didn't even build fences. And they put the inmates in here, and they were shocked to see that all the inmates just left. Like they just left the facility because there was nothing keeping them there. and they were confused as to why the inmates wouldn't stay in this land with no walls, no guards, no nothing. This is the type of ideology that we're talking about here, and you just have to look and say, well, what did you expect would happen?
Let's face it, everyone craves freedom, right? So that environment, there was still a restriction on that freedom. No bars, no guards, no doors.
Bye.
I'll maintain my freedom. See ya.
Right.
Right?
So
Yeah.
So one of the things that we're also seeing is there's cases where there are juvenile criminals out there. They're committing violent crime. There was a case recently where one of them, it was either an assault or a murder, and we don't get to hear who this person is, and they're going to be treated differently as a result of them being a minor. So we're in this situation where they may be sent back home onto the street. Nobody on the street that they're actually that's living on the same street as this potential criminal gets to even hear that there's a violent criminal, no matter the age, maybe a door down. And this has brought up a lot of calls to reform how we treat juveniles. It's called on reforming the fact that maybe we do release the name, maybe we do release the address of this individual if they commit a horrendously violent crime. But we're starting to see a rise in youth crime. I imagine there's a correlation with the extremely high youth unemployment rate right now that we're seeing across this country, as well as many of the other situations that are facing this country. What are you seeing? Are these conversations valid to have in terms of reforming how we treat the privacy of youth, depending on the infraction?
Yeah, I've had those conversations with stakeholders across this country. All are uniform in their belief that the Youth Criminal Justice Act, which is the federal statute that governs any criminal infractions by anyone between the ages of 12 and 17 are administered under, needs to be significantly reviewed and amended. To your point, over the last several years, again, at least once, twice, sometimes 3 times a week, we are hearing of tragic stories of Canadians, lawful Canadians, just simply going about their own business, whether it's shopping, whether it's in their home, whether it's driving their
like
vehicle.
That one lady.
Gardening, putting groceries in the back of her car, who are literally being stabbed to death and or shot and or beaten to death by youths as young as 13 and 14 years of age. I remember, there's so many cases, Ryan and Tanya, but the one that stands out to me as a most disturbing example of the need for change, I think it was in the GT area, was that 80-plus-year-old grandmother who had purchased groceries, had opened up her trunk and was placing the bags in her trunk, was confronted by a 14-year-old youth who demanded her car keys, wanted to steal her vehicle, take her vehicle. And she did what every, I think, Canadian would be doing in the circumstances, unless you ask the York police chief, and his view is just comply. That's another story. She said, no, leave me alone, okay? and he pulled out a knife and he stabbed her to death. And then within minutes, he is texting his friends as he's joyriding in her vehicle, and described the reason why he did what he did. She refused to release the vehicle. I wanted to go for a ride. And that youth was on release for another auto theft at the same time. A 14-year-old youth. So it's asked me to reflect on my entire career of either defending or prosecuting youth. Have I seen this degree of violence with youth in my prosecutorial or my defense career? The answer is absolutely not. Yes, I dealt with some really significant, obviously, murder cases involving youth, but they were 16 and 17 years of age. And I find the age is just getting lower and lower where they're committing these heinous crimes. There's been a complete devalue of human life with these youth, and I'm wondering, what are the root causes? There's probably so many root causes at play here, but what I can say definitively is the degree of criminal activity and violence with our youth today in that demographic, 12 to 17, is vastly different than it was 25 plus years ago when the Youth Criminal Justice Act was introduced. The Youth Criminal Justice Act replaced the Young Offenders Act, and the purpose of the new statute, which is the old statute now, was to provide meaningful consequences to youth accused who commit criminal offenses. So clearly there were provisions to deal with those youth who commit very serious offenses, such as murder. They can still be convicted of first-degree murder. They can still be convicted of second-degree murder. They can still be convicted of manslaughter. But let's take a look at the penalties. And you tell me, in today's day and age, in September of 2025, if that provides meaningful consequences. That youth, that 14-year-old youth, likely was charged with second-degree murder, unless there's some evidence to show planning and premeditation. Likely second-degree murder. He's looking at a 4 to 5 year sentence, not in a penitentiary, in a youth facility where 2/3 of that sentence would be served in a secure setting. A secure setting for a youth, still vastly different than a real prison sentence for an adult. And then he moves into an open facility to help with his rehabilitation, reintegration into the community. So you tell me, is the loss of a human life, is that a meaningful consequence? 5 years, or first degree at 7 years? Again, a split between secure custody and open custody? I don't think so.
I was just going to say that. How can our government justify, essentially they're saying the price of a human life is 5 or 7 years.
Well, and I think this comes back to it's the overcompensation for the rights of the accused, and the mentality will be, well, they're young, and we don't want to destroy their life, and all of this.
And the purpose is behind this legislation, which I'm sure was the purpose behind the Young Offenders Act and the statute that preceded the Young Offenders Act, is that we as a society must accept the fact that the youth, the mind of a youth, the brain of a youth is still developing. I accept that. I certainly accept that, medically speaking, scientifically speaking. And that there is perhaps a diminished responsibility because of that evolving maturity that happens with youth. But that needs to be tempered, and I can use my case my personal case as an example. when I take a look at my own twin daughters, 16 years of age, when they were about to hit the preteen bracket, the sophistication of their communication and their thought patterns and their demands. And I reflected on where I was at that age bracket. It was completely different. The maturity level is increasing with youth. So a 10-year-old or a 12-year-old, 14-year-old youth today is vastly different than it was 25 years ago.
But even if it wasn't, I would argue, not with you, but with the act, is that can you forgive a teen for shoplifting? Sure. Can you forgive a teen for maybe taking a car? Sure. Lapse of judgment, hormones, whatever you want to call it. But in Canada, I can't tolerate any excuse that anyone would make for a youth to say, well, they didn't know any better to stab an 80-year-old lady.
Wholeheartedly agree.
Like, everybody understands that you don't do that. Like,
Yep.
it's just it's given.
Yep.
And
the sense of entitlement.
right.
I wanted your car right now, and you should have given me those keys. Because you didn't, you deserve to die.
And the fact that if it wasn't her, it would have been somebody else.
Somebody else.
Because that 14-year-old had a weapon on them, obviously decided what they were going to do,
Yeah.
and obviously knew what they were prepared to do in order to get it. So you almost could argue that it was premeditated, because it would have been someone else, and they stated their intent. It wasn't that they accidentally stabbed this person, they intended to. We need to get real, but we also need to try and understand. I think we do understand. We need to accept why this is happening, and you see it every generation. Blame goes to rock music, it goes to video games, it goes to TV, it goes to violent movies. I think this all comes down to the effect of 10 years of Liberal government, in that Canadians are there's so much struggle right now that both mom and dad are having to work so much that there is literally no guidance for these kids growing up.
None.
I think we're starting to see some of the impacts of even the lockdowns come out with the lack of socialization of these kids.
Yeah.
And they don't have their social skills, and mom and dad aren't around to provide it anymore because they're working 2, 3, 4 jobs just to stay alive. And we're seeing the result of virtually no parenting for these kids.
Correct. No parenting, and to your point about the Liberal government's weak approach to criminal activities for both youth and adult, is they have known for a long time that there are very weak consequences to their actions as a youth. So they become disposable pawns for organized crime and gangs in larger centers. The rise that we had a few years ago with auto thefts, down a little bit, but still significantly higher than where it was prior to 2015. By and large, most of them, the actual thieves themselves, were youths who were recruited specifically knowing that if they were caught, the penalty for a youth stealing a car, slap on the wrist, little bit of probation, little bit of community service, and knowing full well that if you do have a youth record, that once you turn 18, there is a process by which that youth record is expunged. They become disposable pawns to organized adult criminals.
Right, because you at 18 they get a get out of jail free
They
card.
do.
And why would you not
They do
take advantage of it?
and because we've got our courts, we've got our appellate courts, we've got our Supreme Court of Canada that are increasingly making it difficult, and I didn't share this with you, but inherent within the Youth Criminal Justice Act, there is a process by which Crowns, depending on the case, depending on the charge, can make application for a youth to be tried as an adult. And then, obviously, if the application is successful, would be facing an adult penalty. Or have the youth being sentenced as an adult. I had been successful in the latter with one particular case, which involved a youth, a 17-year-old youth, who drove recklessly down a road and hit two teenage boys and killed them instantly. And I knew that the penalties under the Youth Criminal Justice Act, if I stayed within the confines of that act, were could be completely insufficient. There was such a public outcry for justice in that case. I made application, and the judge agreed with me that he should be sentenced as an adult. So that, again, the sentence was a little bit lower than what an adult would have received, but still provided meaningful consequences to the youth and provided a sense of closure for the community. So I was very proud of that case. But my point is that more and more courts are really making it exceedingly difficult for Crowns to proceed with these applications. And the criminals know that, the adult criminals know that, the youth criminals know that. So they know that the existing penalties are so weak that, in my view, the consequences are immaterial. It is that risk-reward analysis. There is more reward to them engaging in a whole host of criminal activities, up to and including random stabbings, beatings, and shootings, than it is otherwise. So my point is, the time has come, and as Vice Chair of the Justice Committee and the House of Commons, the time has come for us to do a serious review of the effectiveness or lack thereof of the Youth Criminal Justice Act. And that's one of the priorities I have for this sitting.
So let's talk about your petition, because it was kind of just getting underway the last time we had you on. How many signatures have you seen?
The last I have heard, I am slightly over 50,000. Now, you remember, I had as former Premier Kathleen Wynne would call it, I gave myself a stretch goal of 1 million Canadians. And I've used every opportunity to travel across this country to speak to community members, to speak to community advocates, to speak to premiers, to speak to cabinet ministers, to speak to regular MLAs or MPPs, police chiefs, police presidents associations. All think it's a fantastic idea. They all agree that all of their pleas, specific pleas, letters, emails, press conferences, calling out the federal government has resulted in no reaction, apart from we understand and we take community safety seriously. Canadians, and I personally, am sick and tired of the lip service of this Carney Liberal government. I need to see action. So I said to myself, I got to present a petition. I have to create a petition, present it in the House, and embarrass the Carney government to say, and I intend on doing this, whatever that number is, I intend on doing this next week when I return to the Hill, that for 4 years you've refused to listen to all the important stakeholders you were supposed to listen to, who asked you to give us real bail reform. How are you now going to ignore the wishes of X amount of Canadians from coast to coast to coast who are asking you, because you represent all of us, all 343 of us represent those Canadians, how are you going to turn down their wish and their demand, because we speak on their behalf, for you to do your number one job and to keep us safe. They want real bail reform.
Are you seeing the same response from people in Quebec? And the reason why I'm asking that is, whatever this bill they bring forward, this crime bill that they think is going to happen, if it's not going to do what needs to be done, we know that at some point that's going to go to committee stage. No doubt it'll be studied at Justice. And if there's an opportunity to amend that bill to put in the clauses that need to be implemented to take or repeal Bill C-75 and the principle of restraint, is there any confidence that the Bloc and the NDP would support the Conservatives in that?
I have every reason to believe they will. I've had informal discussions with many Bloc members. I have had great discussions with the provincial justice minister. I have spoken with several police chiefs in the province of Quebec. They are all on board with my approach when it comes to changing our bail system. So very optimistic that I will have the support of the Bloc. And I've made some, not all, some inroads with the 7 NDP members. Because as I said, and I keep repeating this, what I'm asking for by way of community safety is not partisan. Okay? Regardless of where you live, regardless of your beliefs, we have to live in a society where law and order dominates every day.
And the people that think that this is partisan, I would just have a question for them. Do you think that before a criminal comes up to you, that they ask your party affiliation? Do you think
You're right.
that when they come up to you, they take a minute and they say, well, this person looks like they would vote, for Mark Carney, so maybe I'll just walk on by.
You're right. Look, an example, look at former Justice Minister Arif Irani, who had 2 cars stolen. All right? So we are all susceptible to crime, regardless of our station in life, regardless of where we live and what our personal beliefs are.
So my message to Canadians is to, if you haven't signed Larry Brock's petition, this is the last go at it. Take a look. It's going to be posted as the pinned comment of this video. It's at the top of the description. And write a letter to some of the NDP folks, letting them know that this is something that needs to happen. Larry Brock needs their support whenever this crime bill gets into the House and gets to committee, because those amendments will be voted on by the House, and if we get the majority and all of the opposition to actually vote for them, this is a chance to make real change in Canada and prevent these tragedies from continuing to happen.
Absolutely.
Mr. Brock, thanks for joining us again.
Always a pleasure. Thank you so much.
And good luck in the fall.
Thank you.